Hello Ninglings, it's Saturday, the day that most Rocky Horror events would take place. In the comments of my last video, Tyler requested that I talk about some of my experiences as a cast member, but there haven't been a whole lot of them that are very notable, considering that I've only been a part of the cast since the end of last year. But Sam Chocolate 11 also requested that I talk about some of my hobbies, so I'm just going to talk about the show itself. This is a disclaimer. I will probably be more profane than usual in this video, and I will probably make some jokes that could be considered offensive. If you choose to continue to watch this video, please remember to have a sense of humor about it. I'll start by saying the movie itself is pretty shitty in a lot of ways. It's B quality at best, which wouldn't be bad if the plot was easier to follow, but as it stands, the plot's like a needle in a haystack. It was originally written as a parody of Hammer horror like Frankenstein or The Day the Earth Stood Still, before Keanu Reeves fucked it up. But it flopped until a year or so after its original release. I do still think it's worth watching, though, if only for context. The way it started as an event was really small at first. The Waverly Theater in New York started playing at midnight, and after a while, the same weirdos kept showing up, and eventually they started yelling at the screen and just having a good time. The people who started the Rocky Horror cult fandom at the Waverly Theater in the 70s are still recognized today as big figures in the community, and some of them have really cool stories to tell, like Dory Hartley, who essentially started the first shadow casting by dressing as Frank and just owning it. There will be a link to her article in the doobly-doo. Her story it'll give you a huge perspective on why the show is so important to us. It's a pretty heavy article, but that's for a reason. Life is a heavy object. Sometimes we need help carrying it. For a lot of people, that help is Rocky Horror. The actual show's simple enough. We have a pre-show when we take what we call Rocky virgins and have them play games to compete against each other. At my Virgin Games, I won a ticket to what I think was any movie at the theater, but I used it at the next Rocky Horror show. We also sometimes have a mini skit beforehand, like we had Little Mary Sunshine a couple of times, and we have had a dance to a Backstreet Boys song. It just depends. Then we have the show itself. When people yell at the screen, we call those callbacks, and that's confused some people who think it's something more bureaucratic. The callbacks start with the 20th Century Fox logo at the beginning, and they end with the black screen that the movie fades out to. For me, at least, the goal of callbacks is to make people laugh. But there's a more serious function, I think, to callbacks that the jokes take a back seat to. Everyone gets angry, and everyone gets into arguments. Sometimes we call people we care about names we don't mean. Sometimes we make fun of their fashion sense. Sometimes we make fun of the way they look. Sometimes we make fun of the way they speak. Sometimes we just scream at them. Sometimes we just say mindless things. This cheap, ridiculous movie gives people an outlet for their anger and general stress that doesn't have consequences. I'd rather pay the $6 that it costs for a ticket than whatever it costs to get a therapist. And I'd rather scream at a fictional character than a friend. And why not make jokes and pop culture references while we're getting it out of our system? Another big part of this fandom is its casts. I see it as a way for people to either show off their confidence or gain it for the first time. And I personally joined because I was already going to the show every month, and I really cared too much about the show and how it affected me for me not to be a part of it. Really, we're just a bunch of audience members that get to act it out in front of the screen. Once you build a boundary there and don't consider yourself that way, you have a chance of losing your audience. Being too official about the whole thing makes you lose the emotive quality that the show really needs. The audience can tell when you're not enjoying it anymore. And when you're in a cast, or even if you're an audience member, you join this bond that's similar to the one that my dad talked about when he talked about motorcycles. He said that if you're in a car and you're stranded on the side of the highway, it could be forever before someone stops and helps you out. But if you're on a motorcycle, you're almost guaranteed that the next person on a motorcycle will stop and help you. It's a lot like that, and it's a lot like Nerdfighteria. If you're in trouble and we have that bond, we've got your back. An example of that is one day after the show we went to go get IHOP, and my friend Steve, who plays Brad typically, he didn't have enough money to get any food. So our cast director Andrea split her food with him even though he wasn't really that hungry anyway. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We're more like a family than anything. So look it up and see if there's a show near you. I definitely recommend going. I would recommend watching the movie first as well, but if you don't want to, that's fine. Just don't be surprised if it's really sexual in nature and the jokes are offensive and the language is vulgar, because it's going to be. We always get one person that complains afterwards, and they are called the show prude. Don't be the show prude. Please, dear God, don't be the show prude. But go to a show if you have a good sense of humor and you're not easily offended. It's really worth it. If you go to certain shows like ours, they have audience props that you can throw and do all sorts of stuff with, like rice that you can throw at the wedding scene. And if you're ever in the Lexington, Kentucky area, check our website and see if we have a show. Our website is themastersaffairs.com. There will be a link in the doobly-doo. And I don't really have much else I can think to say, so I'll end it here. Becky and Dylan, I'll see you tomorrow.